Hello and welcome to Plus Sports and Plus TV Africa. My name is Mikhail Tinubu and I am your humble host on this humble journey. I'm about to take you around the world of sports. Everything that's been happening today and maybe even some of it that has been percolating and building up over the last few days. And one of those is the persistence of racism in the world of football and in sports in general. But in recent times, one particular player has become the lightning rod for all of the racial discontent that people have felt regarding how pervasive the issue of racism is in football. And in fact, it seems that more steps are about to get taken regarding that particular issue. But before that, I want to welcome on the show Abdulquadir, Adedapo. Good evening, Adedapo.
Good evening to you. It's good to be on your show this lovely Thursday evening. Like rightly mentioned, racism has almost destroyed the world of sports, with athletes always having to complain. And like you said, Vinicius Jr., one player that has been very vocal for the fact that he's suffered series of racism in Spain and he has not kept short about it. It looks like finally we might just be having one little solution to the issue of racism in the world of sport and especially in the world of football. With, of course, Vinicius Jr. fronting what FIFA wants to call a new committee that will checkmate and, of course, look at racism and have a holistic view about racism in general in football.
Well, we'll come back to that story because there's so much to unpack there. We can only hope that by the time we get to the end of that particular story, by the time we figure out what FIFA is intending to do, what the administrations within the world of football are intending to do, perhaps then football being the most popular sport in the world will be leading the way and setting an example for the rest of sports. But before then, let's talk about money. Money, money, money. It's the root of all evil. It makes the world go round. And it is the singular pursuit by which athletes are mostly motivated. Used to be, it was all about the honors, the medals, the titles. Now, the bigger the paycheck, the more likely a player is likely to sign up to join a football club. And why shouldn't they? There's so much money in the world of sports. There's so much money in particular in the world of football. And club football in particular is raking in so much of it. Every single club within the Premier League is by every standard in the rest of Europe considered rich. So much so that as soon as an underling, a remote outsider of a club such as Brighton, jumps ahead of the queue and breaks into Europe, there is so much financial capital waiting to be spent to go out there and spend heavily in the transfer window. Last season, or I should say the beginning of last season, during the summer window, Nottingham Forest famously went out into the window and spent so much money that they brought in practically two first 11s. 2 11s worth of players. It begs the question, what even happened to the team and the squad that brought them into the Premier League in the first place? But that's how much money there is on offer within the Premier League. The amount of money that the broadcasting rights offers to every single club is astronomical. So much, isn't it? Abdulquadir, I wonder whether, and it goes to the heart of the question we need to ask today. Is the influx of money, so much of it, into the Premier League these days, is it going to be a blessing or ultimately a curse?
Well, I think it's a blessing, and you look at the fact that let's look at Newcastle United. Under the former owner, under the tutelage of Mike Ashley, they were almost a stagnant club. And the Saudis brought in so much money. And look at Newcastle United right now. We'll be playing Champions League football next season. Now, Newcastle United finished in the top four and will be attracting the best of players. For example, they have been linked with Nicola Varela He just reached the Champions League final with Inter Milan. But he wants to come to Newcastle because one, there is Champions League football, and there is money. You look at Manchester City. City are who they are because of the influx of money. Pep Guardiola can afford to buy a defender worth 50 million, doesn't like his style of play, put him on the bench and loan him for 5 million and let the same player come back and tell him, I don't want you again. We saw at some particular time when he joined Manchester City, he bought in three goalkeepers until he got a desired goalkeeper. He bought in 6 to 7 centre backs until he got his desired period. And even after that, we understand he might still want to go for Gavidol, who is worth in the region of 100 plus. Now let's go back a bit to when Roman Abramovich was in charge of Chelsea. It was still the same money. The Blues were just a good club, but they were not a super rich club. But the moment money came into Chelsea, he brought him as a then the best manager in Europe, Jose Mourinho. The Blues won their first Premier League title in 50 years. Now Manchester United also want to sell because they know with the influx of money from the Saudis or the Qataris, if possible, the club will continue to, of course, vie for honors on all cylinders. Now, if you go to Real Madrid, if you go to Barcelona, now Barcelona are suffering and cannot attract the best of the best players because of debt, because there's no money. If a Qatari or a Saudi investor wants to fly into Barcelona today, they will accept it. Same as Real Madrid, same as Bayern Munich. Juventus are struggling because there is no money. Now the clubs who are financially buoyant are enjoying because it keeps competitiveness. Now, another advantage of the influx of money is it makes it more competitive.
Yeah.
Now we can have Newcastle United tell the rest of the Premier League that I am now the new sheriff in town. I can also compete. Like you rightly mentioned, Nottingham Forest came into the Premier League. They have money in their right, and also got so many players.
I take your point about the competitive nature of the Premier League being more inclusive now, of even teams that weren't traditional juggernauts way back when. Pre the Roman Abramovich era at Chelsea, it was Manchester United, Arsenal, and Liverpool. There were the teams that routinely competed at the top of the table. Manchester United and Arsenal primarily during the 90s. And over the course of the 27 years or so that Sir Alex Ferguson was in charge of Manchester United, there was a buildup of wealth, of capital, of a financial base based off of the successes they had on the pitch. However, and that did keep them at the top of the table. And for the longest time, they, along with Real Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, were the juggernaut clubs in Europe who could afford the most. So usually, even at Manchester United, a player gets called up by Real Madrid, gets signaled for a chance to come play for the All Whites. They usually went because there was more money to be made. There was the prestige of playing for such a European giant. But now, these clubs that are becoming the richest clubs in the league, when Chelsea became the richest club in the Premier League, based solely on the wealth of the ownership. And then subsequently, Manchester City having a family wealth about 100 to 200 million pounds. And now you have Newcastle, same thing, 260 billion pounds. And I say that I go back to Manchester City. Also, their wealth in the billions of pounds. All of this wealth has come into these clubs, raised their level without them having to struggle to earn that wealth on the pitch. The wealth came before the championships, and now the championships are following suit. I remember way back when Manchester City, in their starting off on their project, their new adventure, they spent so much money on Robinho, stealing him from Real Madrid.
Sound like Phillips, you know?
Yes, and they paid him in astronomical wages. What by that time was considered astronomical wages. Now, even Arsenal have to offer a Bukayo Saka a 300 to 350 million pound wages just to keep him at a club that, for all intents and purposes, he is claimed to love and wants to stay at. Yet, he needs such expensive incentives to keep him there. How does this not eventually backfire on clubs such as Arsenal, who now feel like they found a stability after years of trying to repay debts incurred from building a new stadium, the Emirates Stadium, having to pinch pennies and spend as little as possible just so they could keep competing in the Champions League. Now they seem renewed. They want to go again. They want to recapture the spirit of the 90s that made them such an attractive destination for the football that they played and for the ability to still pay competitive wages. Now, even they are trying to buy the likes of Moises Caicedo, Declan Rice, players that are not going to be cheap. They're offering huge, expensive wages to players they already have just to keep them happy. How does this not leave us with a bad taste in the future date? How do we not say this is a curse? Because it will only keep ballooning. The cost of all of this will keep going up.
First, it's the reality of what football is at this point. Now, if you sign it, if a player is coming into a bigger club, let's say a player wants to leave Brighton and is probably on a 30,000 a week wages at Brighton and wants to come into Manchester City or Arsenal, or let's say City. Now he's looking at probably taking it from 30 to the least minimum of 200,000 a week in terms of wages. One, the wage capacity is very high. He's seeing it as one potentially very huge payday for him to, of course, play football and earn so much money because he's making the step in his career. You rightly mentioned Bukayo Saka. By Arsenal, when the player says he loves the club, Chelsea are unable to agree a deal with Mason Mount because all of a sudden, the boyhood club of the team wants to earn around 300. But you don't blame him also. Marcus Rashford, Antonio Martial, Jadon Sancho, Harry Maguire. Now, these are players in the Three Lions, Harry Kane, you know, Callum Hudson-Odoi are all earning money in astronomical amounts as weekly wages. And I also give the same on the field of play. I look at myself and what I bring to the team, and I look at players who are also at the club. Ben Chilwell is one of the highest earners at Chelsea. And if I look at Chilwell, if I am Mason Mount and I look at Chilwell and I look at myself, I also tell myself, I want these wages. And the club are condemned to pay because if you lose those players, if you let these players go because you can't pay them or you want to, of course, negotiate something nicer or lesser with those players, when you go for another player, now the player who is coming in also wants to come to a bigger club and wants more money. It's unfortunate that the football world is now players are now motivated by finance and not what they deliver on the field of play. We can say so much about the fact that the old stars like the Ronaldinhos of this world, the Raul Gonzalez, never made so much money in terms of wages compared to what these modern day players are making. But the moment Neymar made that transfer from Barcelona to Paris Saint-Germain, Cristiano Ronaldo's wages began to multiply. Messi's wages was astronomical. You cannot stop it. Now everybody wants 200,000 in the least minimum in football after tax, not even with tax. After tax. Now Sadio Mane said, "No, I will leave Liverpool because I don't want to be on 200. I think I should be earning around 300." And they went to Bayern Munich. Now these players don't even care whether this club they are joining will be of good use to their career. Now it is the finance, first the finance, and after the finance, the football on the field of play will follow suit. Before, it used to be the football first, and after the football, the finance will follow suit. It's the trend of what is happening right now in football, and we can only go by it. Now, for the club side, they will always have a way to make the money because when you keep these players happy and they are competitive, they are winning games. The club remains as the club value continues to rise, which means investors will continue to come. Whether you like it or not, it's a win-win situation because it's business. If the club don't see value in paying these players Because like 3, 4 years ago was an academic graduate at Arsenal. If he was earning less than 10,000 a week, and he's suddenly on his 200 or 300,000 a week with the Gunners, it's because Arsenal have seen value in him and have looked at the number of years he spent and have seen so much value in placing that amount of him and seen that there will be a return on in the club in the longer future. And that's why they said,
We've
let's put
seen
this on him.
we've seen the impact of too much money too quickly, how it can damage the mentality of players, how it can make them
Exactly.
lose focus. When wages are being paid at this astronomical rate on such a regular occasion, and even the average players now can demand as much as 100, 150 minimum because the better players are getting from 200, 250 upwards above 300. How does this not diminish the focus and professionalism of young players?
Now, even the young players. Now, when the player comes from the academy and makes it into the first team in the first season, the first thing he wants after few months is a contract renegotiation. If you don't renegotiate with that player, other clubs are already looking at him. Let's take for example, Theo Foden. When Foden played at the Under 20 World Cup and Pep Guardiola decided to feature him and he broke into stardom, Manchester City knew immediately that Foden was on the wages of less than 5,000 a week. If they don't renegotiate with Foden, another club in the Premier League will offer him times 10 of what City will offer, and they will walk. Yes, he would have won more titles with City, but he also tell himself that I will also play games there and try and win titles. And City pushed his offer to 250, and right now Foden is one of the top 10 earners at Manchester City at a very young age. I agree that it diminishes the morale of these players. They don't give all on the field of play, but it's rather unfortunate that it's the reality of football at
Let's
this
talk
time.
about homegrown players.
While,
Let's talk about homegrown
yeah,
players. Back in the day when Real Madrid assembled the
the
Galacticos,
Galacticos.
one of the chief problems with that model was that they were pitting established professionals and putting them on the same team to share locker rooms with young talents. And then they were paying these juggernauts such huge wages. Meanwhile, the youngsters, the ones who came through the academies, had no chance of ascending up the wage ladder to matching these
Exactly.
players. Ultimately, a lot of them flamed out, and it was the juggernauts that we remember today. It's the Ronaldos, the David Beckhams, the Zinedine Zidans, Roberto Carloses
The Louis
that we
Figo.
remember today because most of that team had little to no footprint of youngsters who came through the academy. Sergio Ramos was the last one of them who was in that squad and who managed, and one would say because by the end of his career, by the time he left Madrid, he was arguably one of the very best defenders in the world. If he had been anything short of that, he wouldn't have been earning the kinds of wages he was on. And now we have Mason Mount, who's at Chelsea, saying he's not going to accept that. He will willingly leave the club he loves to go to Manchester United, compete
Exactly.
for honours, diminish the chances of his team, his boyhood club, winning such honours, especially when they go head to head. He will go all out to score goals against them, to create assists against them. And now he's going to do all of that against a team that he supposedly still loves, a team that the rest of his family probably still loves. He's going to go up against them because he's not willing to accept the old model of youngsters who come through the academy not getting paid as much as the players who come from abroad and come from external teams to join the squad. Is this the end of wage disparity between superstar signings and homegrown players?
But I think it is. In all honesty, you just mentioned Mason Mount. I could give Bukayo Saka with Arsenal. I could add Trent Alexander-Arnold to a large extent with Liverpool. I could add Phil Foden with Manchester City, and all of these players came through the academy system. Now, Rhys James, Carlo Hudson-Odoi, all came through the academy system. Where remember that these players are what they are because of the investment the club puts in the academy. And these players don't care because at the academy level while they played, they also won laurels for these clubs. Now they have now developed into better players from the academy players, and all of a sudden, other players come from other leagues and are paid more than them. And these players are saying no to it. If we are after the same thing on the field of play, and I probably will offer more than these players you have brought into the club, you should be willing to also pay me the same amount or even more than you are paying these players. It will be difficult to use the word, let's give homegrown players this section of money, and let's give players who are coming on further established players this section of money. Now, if I start as an homegrown player and I break into the first team of my club, the moment I break into the first team and I become a regular player, if I was earning 5,000, the first thing I want to do, even before the end of the season, because other clubs are already watching and are saying, if this player is earning this and he has this amount of years left, they can actually buy off his contract. And you know this player will probably develop into a world beater, into a world class player, or a superstar in the future. You want to secure his future. First, you've got a greedy agent who is telling the player, no, this is where we stand. And you've got the club who are also trying to be selfish with the player and are saying, no, this is where we stand. And at the
We
end of the
we
day,
have
both parties have to meet at the center.
we already have less players who are one club players who spend all of their lives at
Exactly.
one club. Now, with the incentive of money being so big within the sport, within club football, it also seems to me like a consequence of that will also be that we will not see players like Steven Gerrard's anymore that stay in one club throughout the bulk of their career or throughout their career. But let's move on to certain points that need mentioning. There is the new FIFA Club World Cup format that is set to expand the numbers of teams that will be participating, and there's an incentive, a clear incentive, to give FIFA a piece of the club football wealth that the UEFA has been enjoying with the Champions League and Europa League and now Conference League for years. This is going to put more pressure because clearly all these administrators, it's like they're seeing that there's so much money going on. We have to capitalize more on it. We have to make more games available. FIFA is talking about making the World Cup a every 2 year affair.
Exactly.
This is ultimately going to lead to breakdown of players. And we might even see clubs having to register as much as 30 players just to compete across the amount of
All
competitions that
competition.
it seems these administrators are putting into the works.
Now, look at the Nations League. Before I go to Club World Cup, last year, Kevin De Bruyne frowned at the Nations League. He said it was an unnecessary waste because it was causing so much problem for the players. But the Nations League did not care about it. They kept on playing games. He was complaining that players who have to play competitive football for their club side and still come and play for the national team return and play for their club side because it's no longer a friendly game. It is now very competitive. But in the defense of some of these organizers, they said, we pay you so much money, so you should be on the field of play when we want you to be on the field of play. Now, for an average person, if you pay him the salary you pay a footballer, somebody who is not a footballer, if you ask him to work almost every single day, he will tell you, I will do the work because these guys earn so much
Much
money.
money, yeah.
Now, the footballers suffer. We don't get competitive football again. We don't see longevity in footballers because, in all honesty, injury will begin to come in.
Yeah.
Now, we cannot enjoy the best and the best of players. You play a Champions League game, you play a league game, you play a Carabao Cup game, you are rushing to play a Nations League game, you are rushing to play a Euro qualifier, rushing to play a World Cup qualifier, all in one season. Now, every window you are almost certain to go because they are no longer friendly games for some European nations, and you cannot tell your
Yeah.
nation, can
It
you, coach, can
seems
you please excuse me
they are not going.
for
There's
this
not going to be
particular
any
competition?
summer window. There's not going to be any summer period now
And
where players aren't playing international football.
because they want them to be competitive. Now, look, the new format of the Club World Cup is FIFA saying, let's expand. Somebody is bringing money into it. Let's expand the Club World Cup. Let's invite more teams. Now, it takes a toll on the leagues. But because we've experimented with the FIFA World Cup in Qatar, and we've seen that we can shrink fixtures and players will not suffer, it means that in the long run, on the long run rather, these competitions will continue to come in into football. And it's absolutely nothing these players can do.
What do
Because
you
a lot of
make
players
of
going there supposed
What do you make of? I don't know if you've seen the new format that is set to come into play for the Champions League by
yeah,
the
I
2024
have
season.
more games. It's going to be more games for the players, expanded, more teams, gives opportunity to more regions to play in the Champions League proper. And at the end of the day, everybody enjoys except the players
Yeah.
because it is more viewership for those of us who are watching the game, more entertainment, more fans to get the chance to be in the stadium to watch games. But at the end of the day, it is sufferness to the
Do you
players.
think
But remember,
do you think that new
in the defense
format
of,
do you think that new format will negate any further conversations about a European Super League?
well, I think it ends whatever Super League will come up, and that's why UEFA know what they are doing. They want to shrink the windows, ensure there are no space to allow these teams have a right to do whatever they want to do. Now, if you are going to participate in the Champions League, because there are more games, which means if you play this week in the Premier League, you play on the weekend, you play the Champions League the following weekend, the following midweek rather, the following midweek, the following midweek. And when you are not playing, you are either playing a League Cup game or an FA Cup game or a replay of a game or whatever game you play or international break. It will be almost impossible to fix a Super League. It's a smart move by UEFA to of course, protect their premium club competition. And in honesty, I really can't blame
These
UEFA. Now, the
these
Super League was almost going to shake them,
yeah.
and they tried to protect the Champions League so that the
These
Super League does not shrink it and take it away.
Abdul Quadri, these changes to the way club football is being run, seem to come into effect before the administrators come up with solutions. Because obviously, we can sit in here, we can see the obstacles and hurdles and difficulties that fans are going to face traveling almost every single week to Europe, across Europe, to watch games in the new version of the Champions League. The Club World Cup, should it become as big as FIFA hopes it will become, that will be added numbers of games every other week that these clubs will have to play. We can see the potential hurdles. We can see the potential difficulties that fans, clubs, and even especially the players will face. And yet, no considerations have been as of yet put forward. No rule changes about how many players clubs can register. No considerations about how many substitutions, an increase in how many substitutions clubs can make within games. Are we going to, first of all, see a major revolt and backlash before we see those updates to the rules?
See, at the end of the day, when these competitions will take center stage, one thing I know for a certainty, UEFA will also consider the plight of those players and the club side. Now, you look at when COVID came and fixtures were the way it was, we understood UEFA brought in FIFA and the regulatory body brought in more substitutes to ease it. Now you even see more homegrown players come in. In some leagues, not like the Premier League, you have a right to put every other player on the bench. After naming your first 11, you can put 11 more players on the bench. But Premier League has that 18. Now, these things will all also come into play. Now, teams may be allowed to register more players, and teams might also be allowed to have as much as 22 players on the bench for every game, or 23 for every game they play. Now, UEFA have said this is the new format, and I know when it kickstarts, they will also look at the fact that more players can also be on the bench in case of certain measures. I might not be surprised if the number of substitutions are also increased. Already we have a team can make as much as 6 in a particular game if there's concussion involved in the game. We might even see a change of rule where they say whatever change you make at halftime will not count. Now, these are things that will definitely come into play. But what UEFA are trying to do first is to counter the Super League to ensure they save their premium competition, which is the Champions League. Because if it gives it for the Super League, which is bankrolled by those who have more money than UEFA, those who want to take power tussle away from Europe, we're talking about the Arabians, the Middle East guys, and part of the Americans who have the money to invest. UEFA want to first stifle them, and I'm certain that at the end of the day, there will be a strong balance from both the clubs,
Speaking
the fans, the players, and every other person.
speaking of the Americans, speaking of the Americans and these Middle Easterns, it took a long time, and a lot of leagues and UEFA in general and FIFA tried their best to break into the American market. It was a vast untapped resource and viewership to that could boost, especially given that that particular country spends so much on advertising. There are more billionaires per capita than anywhere else in the world. And it used to be the holy grail when an American came into town and said, I want to buy this club. Whether they were a small club, a big club, I want to buy this club. I want to add it to my already impressive sports franchise portfolio. I want to own a football club. I want to own an NFL club. I want to own an NBA team. I want to own all these, and I will synergize the profit sharing that these teams can offer each other. I will bring an NBA game. I will push for an NBA game to come to England. I will push for an NFL game to be played on British soil. Now, it's the Middle Easterns that are getting in on the act. We've seen the amount of money they've thrown, guaranteed prize money they've thrown into golf. Live Golf is nearly pushing the PGA out of business, so much so they've decided to partner up. New owners from the Middle East can offer more than American owners who are being prized out of being competitive in the market. I remember with the ownership of Liverpool, when they came into town, it seemed like Liverpool had finally found an ownership that would back them, that would allow them to push against the overwhelming odds of Manchester City, that would allow them to compete. And for a time, they've been competing. But even now, Chelsea have found new ownership. They've jumped from one billionaire to even more billions. Newcastle now are also in the billions game.
Super rich, super rich.
So, at the end of the day, when these billionaires, and don't forget, Manchester United are in the middle of a takeover bid, there's likely going to be a preference on the part of the Glazers to give the new owners, to give ownership of the club, transfer it to the Middle Easterns who are willing to pay for 100% of the club, as opposed to Sir Ratcliffe, who simply wants 60% of the club and allow the Glazers to maintain some ownership of stakes in the club. When these billionaires from the Middle East get together, and we're going to have a Qatari, we're going to have the Saudi Arabians, we're going to have the Abu Dhabis, how can anybody, even the likes of Chelsea, compete with such billions when these billionaires, these are not just individual billionaires, they are bring in family wealth of upwards of 100, 200 billion pounds to bear on the market in England and perhaps even the rest of Europe. How can anybody else compete? Even Real Madrid are already complaining that state ownership, like PSG, like Man City, is very difficult for them to compete against. So much so, they can only now afford to go for either an Mbappe this summer or Jude Bellingham. They've already signed Jude Bellingham. It's unlikely they will be able to go for Mbappe. Meanwhile, likes of Manchester United, should they fall into Qatari hands, would be able to go for Mbappe. Haaland is a major purchase for Man City, but they could still go for Mbappe. They could still go for any player in the world of football. Is anybody else going to be able to compete? Because at the beginning of this conversation, you said all of that is going to make the league more competitive. But when these Abu Dhabi, Qatari, and Saudi Arabian owners are at the top, the zenith of the money tree in England, is there really any competition left?
Well, I think there is. Now, let's look at the European trajectory of how football has been played. Now, the money has worked so perfectly in England, but there are clubs who remain traditional clubs, regardless of how much money the Middle East guys bring into English football. Chelsea has spent so much money, Manchester City so much money, and now Newcastle United. But why they spent money and why Real Madrid remain an household name, Bayern Munich remain an household name, Barcelona were an household name, they won more Champions League titles than all of these clubs I've mentioned combined in these years. Now, it tells you that the competitive nature will come in, but traditional clubs will remain traditional no matter how much money comes into football. There are still players whose dream is to play for Real Madrid, regardless of how much money somebody's putting in Newcastle United, regardless of how much money is going into Manchester United. Now, United will still go toe to toe with Real Madrid and will still probably lose even if they have the Kylian Mbappe, the Neymar, and even the Grand Marcus Rashford and the best of the best players. It is because for some strong clubs, over a long period of time, they've maintained a certain structure in Europe. And even if they don't weigh you, they don't, of course, convince you with so much money, the club legacy and structure is enough to persuade you to want to come over their side and remain with them. It's rather unfortunate that Bayern Munich are one of the strongest, and Barcelona are at the forefront of the receiving end of so much money coming into English football from the Middle East. Real Madrid are still able to stand because they have changed their approach in getting superstars. Now, Real Madrid, brother, will coach them at a very young age. We just saw what they do with Vini and Rodrigo. Coach them from Brazil, bring them in when the age is right, and become world beaters. And if they wish to sell them for a bigger price, and then continue to revolve and become a bigger club like the rest. And that's why it's letting Marcus Rashford, um, even if the Middle East take over, will tell you in the future someday that his dream is to play or wear the Galacticos shirt and play for Real Madrid,
But
regardless of how much money.
eventually, will financial fair play rules by UEFA have to get even harsher to create a more level playing field for the rest of Europe to compete with England?
Unfortunately, UEFA are the architect of their own problem. Now, the financial fair play rule is a charade as far as I'm concerned. Teams clearly beat the financial fair play rule, and UEFA just an eye off it and let it go. Now we've seen how City has bought players the last couple of years. I, for one, know how City have been doing. There's a Manchester City group where City owns so many clubs around the world, from Australia to the US to France to Spain, and even in England to Belgium. Their own clubs there, and City move players around, small players around those nations, those club side. Now UEFA have failed to checkmate the activities of some of those players. Now City will sign a player for Manchester City group, now not City this time around, not Man City as a club. We sign a player and probably loan the player, sign the player to Nobel for 4.5 million, for let's say for example, when you know it's not even the player's worth. And after 6 months, the player is on his way to another city club in somewhere in Australia. And then you ask yourself, why is FIFA, UEFA not checkmating the affairs of some of these things? PSG did it for a very long time and were able to sign Kylian, were able to sign Neymar, Draxler, Angel Di Maria. In all honesty, a club with a small wage cap suddenly becomes a club with a very big wage cap. Nobody asked the question. Chelsea did it, City are doing it, Manchester City are doing it. Now Newcastle will also probably do it. And the UEFA cannot stop them. Because at the end of the day, if you put too much stiff punishment on this club and they begin to complain too much, and that's why the Super League, whatever, came into play. Because the club felt they were sustained by UEFA, even when UEFA were making so much money, and wanted to control their own finance in a competition. They could control and decide the teams that come in and the teams that don't come in. For UEFA, it will be difficult to take stiffer punishment on this club because they've allowed them also enter into the system so deep that they can only find them on the surface and not so deep.
All right.
In the long run, UEFA, FIFA, and the football governing body in total will need to find a right balance. But in reality, the FIFA World Cup in Qatar showed FIFA, UEFA, and the rest of the world that with money, you can turn the tide of anything and host any World Cup at any time in the world. See, the World Cup can be played anytime in the world because Qatar did not just convince FIFA that they were able to do this. They used the wealth they had to convince FIFA so much that FIFA could consider going back to Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, for a World Cup in 2030, even when it's not their time. So it tells you that even as much as you want to put it down, this football governing body also needs the influence of this wealth.
All right,
to ensure
maybe
they continue to play well with
given
them.
all this wealth that is being thrown around, maybe it's time for the NFF in Nigeria to go recruit some Middle Eastern money to buy up our clubs. Maybe that's
Well, one reason why we might not see it is the fact that when you have a system that is so corrupt, a system that doesn't favor public-private investment into the league, I am sorry, no investor will come in.
all right. But now
Remember,
we've just seen a report coming out of London that West Ham United have rejected an opening offer totaling £90 million from Arsenal for Declan Rice. The newly crowned Europa Conference League winners will reluctantly allow Rice to leave this summer after he turned down a new deal but value him in excess of £100 million. Arsenal lead the race for his signature, but their opening offer falls short of that valuation. The bid reportedly consisted of an initial £80 million plus a further £10 million in add-ons. Bayern Munich held an interest in Rice but have so far decided not to pursue a deal. However, West Ham expect Manchester City to enter the running with a formal bid. Sources added that Arsenal are expected to return with an improved offer for the midfielder. City are assessing their options, and sources suggest that West Ham would be interested in a player plus cash deal, which would see Calvin Phillips move east to East London, but no such proposal has yet been made. Now, it used to be that when a player was in the final year of his contract, the clubs scrambled to get him off their wage bill, get something for him better than nothing. But that is not where West Ham seem to be right now. And I think it goes further to proving the idea that there's so much money saturated in the league that clubs like West Ham feel they are in the driving position to demand in excess of £100 million, even if Arsenal are interested so deeply to finally break their own club spending record on one player. How could West Ham United be this audacious with their demands, if not because of the amount of wealth already in the league?
Well, it's the valuation of English players overhyped, overpriced, and everybody wants to go for 100 million. Now, Moses Caicedo is lesser than that. Um, in January, Arsenal signed Trossard, lesser than that. And all of these players have, one way or the other, brought in something different. And West Ham have been very vocal for the fact that Declan Rice, when David Moyes said it during the season, it's above 100 million or nothing. And Arsenal know that West Ham know that the player is in demand and are willing to wait. They've just won a European trophy. They've won a title, which means they can also even tell whichever suitors that are coming that we've won a title, we can win another title with this guy. They wait. If
But
Arsenal is giving them 90 million, they know for a certainty that if they go back to the market with that same amount of money on another player, the club will also want a chunk of that money. If Arsenal is offering 80 and feature 10 in add-ons, they'll probably end up spending close to that amount of money to get a similar player as a replacement for Declan Rice.
but certainly they are
But
unlikely to get a player of the level
if they're
of
holding for
Declan Rice.
100 million or more, they have more money to spend. Are probably waiting for City to also come into the power, like you rightly mentioned. If City come into it, they get Calvin Phillips, who will be a direct replacement for Declan Rice, and also get money in the bank. They don't need to spend the money back, but they will have a player. I think what West Ham are trying to do is to play smart,
But
wait on the deal.
but I believe this will go down to the end of the window, and if it does,
It
if by
will
August they
definitely.
haven't gotten him off their wage bill, they will have to settle for a much lower price than they were hoping for.
That if he doesn't sign a new contract with them.
All
But
right.
if he decides to sign, he continues next season.
All right, thank you, Abdulquadir Adedapo. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. We hope to discuss more with you in the future.
Thank you so much for having me, and the pleasure is definitely mine.
Have a good evening. And to everyone at home or at work, my name is always Mikhail Tinubu. Remember, life is never boring with some sports. It's been an honor having you join us here on Plus Sports on Plus TV Africa. Have a good evening.